Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Threadbare Reviews. Today's subject is the recommendation of patron JimJam78, who wants me to take a look at an old 1985 film titled Enemy Mine. And while I have loosened my restrictions from earlier in the series, Enemy Mine is very much a psychological science fiction film. The story about the story. Enemy Mine was originally the title of a novella written by the American author Barry B. Longyear. He's written a number of science fiction and mystery stories over the years, but Enemy Mine is easily his most famous. It helps that the story earned a Hugo, Nebula, and Locus Award, plus it helped him to get the John W. Campbell Award for Best New Writer of 1980. Apparently, he was the only author to ever win a Hugo, Nebula, and Campbell Award in one year until 2018. Considering all of that critical acclaim, it's not terribly surprising that a few years later, Kings Road Entertainment and 20th Century Fox would buy the filming rights and start production in 1984. Unfortunately, this production was troubled from the start. The director, Richard Longcrane, was arguing with the producers, the Icelandic location shots didn't look alien enough, the weather kept changing, and the alien costume looked like a rubber suit. However, the studio was already invested, and so they eventually decided to replace the director and restart production. The new director was Wolfgang Petersen, who at that point was finishing directing The Neverending Story, an American-German production that, if you haven't seen it, you should. Petersen moved the production to Munich in West Germany, and location shots were filmed in the Spanish Canary Islands off the coast of Africa. Thanks to the production issues and a vigorous yet poorly aimed marketing campaign, the total budget costs came out to around $40 million. However, the film only made $12.3 million at the box office, partly because of the misleading marketing, and partly because Enemy Mine got mixed reviews from the critics. However, the film got a second chance when it became the first ever Western film to be publicly released in what was then the Soviet Union. And enough of a following has built up in the years since then to give the film the status of cult classic. So, will I agree with the critics of then or of today? Let's find out. The review. In the future, there is a war going on between humans and the Dracs, race of hermaphroditic reptilians. During a space dogfight, the protagonist, Willis E. Davidge, pursues a Drac ship into the upper atmosphere of an uncolonized planet, and as a result of this, both ships crash land on the surface. Davidge follows the other ship's smoke trail so he can finish off the pilot, but he fails, and the Drac pilot, named Jariba Shigan, decides to tie him up instead of killing him. Soon afterwards, the two reluctantly decide to help each other so that they can survive the hostile environment. Over time, the two learn each other's languages, and Jariba teaches Davidge about his religion, which sounds an awful lot like most compassionate human religions. Jariba also becomes pregnant, which is apparently something that just happens to Dracs. Jariba dies during the labor, but he first tells Davidge that his child's name should be Zamis, and that he should take it back to their homeworld and recite the child's lineage so that it can become a full member of society. The child grows up quickly, and Davidge teaches it what he can, but eventually it gets curious and is captured by scavengers, basically a group of human bandits who capture Dracs and use them as slave labor. Davidge gets shot while trying to protect Zamis, but before he dies, he gets found and rescued by the human military. After recovering, Davidge immediately breaks out to go rescue Zamis, and with a little help from his old friends, he kills the scavengers and helps Zamis and the rest of the captured Dracs get back to their homeworld. I have to say, there were a lot more stages to this movie than I had expected. From what I'd heard, I figured the bulk of the movie would be about Davidge and Jariba learning to get along, and that is the bulk of the movie. But what I hadn't expected was all of the stuff that came after that. The kid, and the scavengers, and the rescue mission. And it was a positive surprise. All of the new developments helped to maintain the pace of the movie, and drive home the themes that the survival portion of the movie establishes. Now, a movie like this depends heavily on its acting, since it's all about the way two people interact in an isolated environment. Fortunately, this film delivers on that thanks to the performances of the two leads, Dennis Quaid as the human and Louis Gossett Jr. as the alien. Bubba Robinson, who plays Zamis, also does very well. Something else that helps is that the Drac makeup is heavy enough to look inhuman while being light enough to allow Gossett and the other actors to express themselves. That's not an easy needle to thread, even with today's technology. Unfortunately, not all of the production matches that level of quality. It's pretty obvious when the film switches between studio shots and location shots, and the costuming and props look rather fake and generic as sci-fi movies go. And while the fighter ship designs are comparatively unique, it was rather jarring to watch them perform pretty standard dogfighting techniques in space. Compared to something like Star Wars, the spectacle is definitely lacking. But fortunately, the spectacle is not the point of this particular film. Overall, I can see why Enemy Mine was overlooked just 2 years after Return of the Jedi came out, but also why the film has managed to find a fan base in the years since its release. I can also see why it was used as a peace offering during the Cold War, and why movies and shows in the coming years would regularly imitate the film. For one thing, the Darmok episode of Star Trek The Next Generation owes a lot of its premise to Enemy Mine. But there's nothing quite like the original, so if you want to see a science fiction movie that's more than just a spectacle, you should give Enemy Mine a watch. The analysis. Enemy Mine is a Cold War analogy. That's not even up for interpretation, that's just a statement of fact. Two people have grown up being taught to hate each other even though they have never met someone from the other side, but after spending time with each other and being forced to work together to survive, they come to realize that they have much more in common than they thought, and that it's the similarities rather than the differences that define them. What's really interesting about Enemy Mine is what you see when you extend this analogy into the other plot points and the minor details. It's also quite interesting that the film's analogy works whether the humans represent the Americans or the Soviets, assuming you swap out a few references Davidge makes about his past. Anyway, with the Cold War analogy in mind, the scavengers in the film essentially represent the various repressive autocratic regimes that the Americans and Soviets propped up, less for the sake of idealism and more for the sake of having strategic allies. The Drac slaves would thus be the people who are for the most part good and honest, but because they believe in the wrong ideology, the Americans or Soviets ignore their suffering. Then there's the ideology itself. At their core, both American democracy and Soviet communism are compassionate ideologies, and both of them believe in things like the value of the common person, the dignity of life, and the need for a government that both serves and cares for its people. The methods may be different, but the end goals of peace, prosperity, and happiness are identical. And yet because both sides seek these end goals, and because both sides distrust or hate each other, the conflict between them breeds war, poverty, and suffering, the opposite of what they're looking for. Both sides know that compassion is best, but neither side is able to practice what they preach. And so we come to the ending. The part where Davidge steals a military spaceship to actually do some good in the universe by killing the scavengers and rescuing both Zamis and the rest of the enslaved Dracs. There's a distinct difference between the fight at the start of the film and the fight at the end, which is that the fight at the start of the film is fueled by hate, while the fight at the end is fueled by love. Therefore, the film seems to be saying, love is more powerful than hate, because Davidge is willing to go to greater lengths to save someone he loves than he was to kill someone he hates. And he was more successful, too, in part because, while no one was willing to follow his crazy decisions when he made them out of hatred, all of his friends followed him to the surface when he went to rescue a loved one. So the thing about love and hatred is that both emotions can inspire people to do the same things. Self-sacrifice, attack the enemy, defend your allies. But while hatred divides, love connects. And ultimately, those connections are more powerful and are much more effective at getting you to those goals of peace, prosperity, and happiness. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.